If you grew up arguing Chevy versus Ford, defending Mopar at the drag strip, or believing your favorite muscle car was untouchable, this ranking might make you angry. Because some of the cars we treat like sacred icons today weren't actually the fastest, smartest, or most important machines of the muscle car era. Meanwhile, a Buick, an Oldsmobile, and even an AMC built cars that could embarrass much bigger names. So I'm ranking 10 classic muscle cars from overrated to legendary, not by auction prices or movie fame, but by what they actually delivered when Detroit's horsepower war was at its peak. And one of America's most famous muscle cars doesn't even make the top 5. Welcome to Motor Memento. If you're new here, stick around and subscribe, because this won't be the last argument we start. At number 10, we have the 1967 Plymouth GTX. Let's get something out of the way immediately. The GTX is not a bad car. It's actually one of the better ones on this list. In terms of raw engineering, Plymouth built it as the brand's flagship performance machine, standard with a 375 horsepower 440 Super Commando V8. And if that wasn't enough, the 426 Hemi sat on the order sheet for an extra $546. Base price landed around $3,178, which wasn't cheap, but you got a genuinely upscale performance car for the money. Bucket seats, a tachometer on the console, heavy-duty suspension, the works. Plymouth wanted a car that could outmuscle the Pontiac GTO, while still feeling like something a grown adult could be seen driving to work in. So why does it sit at the bottom of this list? Because a year later, Plymouth built a cheaper, louder, more stripped-down car that understood the assignment better. We'll get to that car. For now, just remember the name, because the GTX is going to keep coming up as the family member that did everything right on paper and still got outshined by its scrappier little brother. Only around 11,400 hardtops and fewer than 700 convertibles were built for the year, and just 720 buyers sprang for the Hemi. The GTX earned Plymouth's performance reputation. It just didn't define it. At number 9, we have the 1969 Dodge Charger RT. Here's where the controversy starts. The Charger is, without argument, one of the most beautiful shapes Detroit ever stamped out of sheet metal. The Coke bottle flanks, the hidden headlights, the way that fastback roofline disappears into the trunk. It still stops people in parking lots more than half a century later. And under the skin, the RT came standard, with a 375 horsepower 440 Magnum, with the 426 Hemi, optional for buyers chasing the ultimate street weapon. But think about why you actually picture this car in your head. Chances are, it's flying over a hill in a chase scene, or wearing a Confederate flag and a horn that plays Dixie on a Saturday night rerun. Hollywood did more for the Charger's legend than Dodge's own engineers did. And that's not an insult, it's just history. Strip away the movies and the television, and the RT was a heavy car chasing lighter, cheaper rivals that could match or beat its numbers at the strip. Fewer than 500 RTs left the factory with a Hemi under the hood, meaning the vast majority of Chargers people worship today were running the same 440 you could get in a dozen other Mopars for less money. None of that makes it a lesser car to look at or to own. It just means the Charger's reputation as an unbeatable street king says more about decades of pop culture than it does about what happened at a 1969 stoplight. At number 8, we have the 1970 Ford Torino Cobra. Ford has a problem, and that problem is named Mustang. Say Ford performance to almost anyone, and their brain jumps straight to a pony car, which means an entire lineup of genuinely vicious intermediate muscle gets ignored. The 1970 Torino Cobra deserves better. Ford completely reinvented the Torino that year, wrapping it in a long, aggressive sports roof fastback body and dropping in a 429 cubic inch V8 as standard equipment, rated at 360 horsepower in base Thunderjet form. Check the right boxes though, and this Ford turned genuinely mean. The Super Cobra jet option brought forged pistons, 4-bolt mains, a hotter solid lifter cam, and a factory rating of 375 horsepower, with 450 pound-feet of torque, numbers that period insiders openly admitted were conservative on paper. Add the drag pack with its Detroit locker or traction lock gearing, and you had a factory-built 13-second car wearing a Ford badge, built to go toe-to-toe with the Chevelle, the Road Runner, the Super Bee, and the Buick GS. Fewer than 1,500 Torinos ever left the factory with that full Super Cobra jet drag pack combination, which means almost nobody has one, almost nobody remembers it, and almost everybody underrates it. Ford really did build something serious here. It just built a Mustang the same year, and the Mustang got all the attention. At number 7, we have the 1970 AMC Rebel Machine. American Motors did not have Chevrolet's factories, Ford's marketing budget, or Chrysler's engine department. What it had was a small team willing to bolt a 4-speed and a serious engine into an unglamorous family sedan and paint it like the American flag threw up on it. And somehow, it worked. The machine used a heavily reworked 390 V8, 10-to-1 compression, a hotter cam, dogleg port heads, and a 690 cubic feet per minute Motorcraft 4-barrel, good for 340 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque, which AMC proudly called the most powerful engine the company had ever put in a production car. That's not a secretly better than the Hemi story, and it shouldn't be sold as one. What it is a company with a fraction of Detroit's resources building a car that followed the muscle car playbook almost perfectly. Familiar intermediate body, serious engine, loud graphics, and a price that undercut plenty of its rivals. AMC only built somewhere between roughly 1,900 and just over 2,300 of them, depending on which registry you trust, which tells you how little breathing room the company had to work with. If you grew up thinking the Rebel Machine was a punchline, this is the part where the joke stops being funny, because AMC genuinely earned this spot. At number 6, we have the 1969 Dodge Super Bee with the 440 six-pack. Chrysler built the Super Bee to be Dodge's answer to a cheaper, meaner idea that had just taken over the muscle car conversation, and midway through the model year, Dodge armed it with something genuinely brutal. The A12 package strapped 3 2-barrel carburetors onto the 440, good for 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, identical torque to the Hemi, at a fraction of the cost. Underneath sat a Dana 60 axle with 4.10 gears, 11-inch drum brakes, and a flat black fiberglass lift-off hood with 6-pack stamped across it in letters you could read from 2 lanes over. This isn't a car that needs flowery description. It's gearing, displacement, and traction engineered by people who understood that stoplight wins come from torque multiplication, not brochure copy. Only 1,907 Super Bees ever left the factory with this package, making it rarer than most people realize. And it sets up an obvious question that this list isn't ready to answer yet. Dodge's Super Bee and Plymouth's own budget bruiser were built from the same corporate parts bin, chasing the exact same buyer. Which one actually nailed the assignment? Hang on to that thought. 6 cars down, 4 to go. And this is where the arguments get louder. If a 1970 Buick shocks you later in this list, that's the reaction I'm hoping for. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because forgotten Detroit stories like these are exactly what this channel exists to dig up. At number 5, we have the 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30. Every car so far on this list has leaned on some version of stripped down and violent. The 442 W30 flips that formula on its head, and that's exactly why it belongs here. Oldsmobile occupied a strange lane inside General Motors, a step above Chevrolet in polish, a step below Cadillac in luxury, and the W30 package proved that didn't have to mean soft. The 455 cubic inch V8 came factory rated at 370 horsepower with 500 pound-feet of torque, backed by a fiberglass hood feeding cold air straight into the carburetor and a camshaft tuned specifically for the package. What made it different wasn't just the number on the spec sheet. It was that you could option a W30 with the comfort features Oldsmobile buyers expected: real carpeting, a properly finished interior, brakes that didn't feel like an afterthought, and still walk away with one of the quickest cars General Motors built that year. Only around 3,100 W30 cars were produced in 1970, which makes them scarcer today than plenty of Chevelles or GTOs wearing bigger reputations. The 442 W30 is proof that a muscle car didn't have to feel like a stripped race car to be a legitimately dangerous one. At number 4, we have the 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. If you're surprised to see a Buick sitting this high, good. That's the entire point of this ranking. Buick spent the 60s building cars for people who wanted a quiet ride to the country club, which is exactly why almost nobody expected what came out of Flint in 1970. The GSX package wrapped Buick's 455 V8 in satin yellow paint, black stripes, a hood-mounted tachometer, and a Stage 1 engine option that Buick officially rated at 360 horsepower. Nobody who actually drove one believed that number. What everybody believed was the torque figure, 510 pound-feet, arriving at a lazy 2,800 RPM, which meant the GSX didn't need to scream to be terrifying. It just leaned into the throttle and left. Here's the important caveat, and it applies to more than just Buick. Advertised horsepower during this era ran through gross ratings, factory conservatism, and plenty of guesswork, so treat every number in this video as a documented figure from period testing, not gospel carved in stone. What matters for the GSX is that Motor Trend clocked it as the quickest American production car it tested that entire year, quicker than cars carrying far louder names. Buick built only around 678 GSX models for 1970, meaning this brutally quick torque monster is rarer than nearly every car ranked below it on this list. Chevrolet had the Chevelle, Dodge had the Charger. Buick, of all brands, had one of the fastest cars in America, and almost nobody noticed. At number 3, we have the 1969 Plymouth Road Runner with the 440 six-pack. Remember the GTX, sitting way back at number 10? This is the car that made it look overdressed. Plymouth launched the Road Runner in 1968 with one simple idea: give young buyers real straight-line performance and strip away everything they didn't actually want to pay for. No console, no fake wood. Just a cartoon bird license from Warner Brothers, a horn that went beep beep, a standard 335 horsepower, 383 V8, and a starting price of $2,870, a full $1,000 cheaper than a comparable GTX. Plymouth hoped to sell around 20,000 of them that first year. They sold 44,599 and nearly doubled that number in year 2. By February of 1969, Plymouth let buyers order the 440 six-pack under option code A12, 390 horsepower, 490 pound-feet of torque, wrapped in a fiberglass lift-off hood for around $463 over the base engine. The Hemi got more magazine covers, sure, and it earned every one of them. But the six-pack Road Runner is the car that actually explains why this whole segment exists. Massive performance, minimal cost, zero pretense. Go back and think about the Super Bee at number 6. Same corporate parts bin, same torque figure, same basic idea, but the Road Runner outsold it, outmarketed it, and arguably understood the assignment just a little more completely. That's not an insult to the Super Bee. It's just that Plymouth built the purest version of the idea first. At number 2, we have the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS with the LS6. If this ranking were only about which car hit hardest in a straight line, the countdown would already be over. By 1970, General Motors had finally lifted its own internal ban on stuffing full-size engines into mid-size cars, and Chevrolet didn't hold back. The Chevelle SS could be ordered with the 454 cubic inch big block in 2 flavors, the milder LS5 and the genuinely unhinged LS6, officially rated at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, using solid lifters, an 11.25-to-1 compression ratio, and a factory rating that dyno tests decades later have shown was almost certainly conservative. Chevrolet built fewer than 5,000 LS6 cars that year, across the Chevelle and its El Camino sibling, and identifying a genuine, numbers-matching example today is its own minor obsession among Mopar and GM collectors alike, so treat any production claim you hear with a healthy dose of skepticism. What isn't in question is what this car represented. By 1970, the horsepower war that had been building since the middle of the decade reached its absolute ceiling, and the LS6 Chevelle sat right at the top of it. Huge displacement, aggressive styling, and a Chevrolet badge that half of America already trusted. This is, by nearly every measurable standard, the peak of what the classic muscle car formula could physically deliver. So why isn't it number one? Because the Chevelle didn't start this war. It perfected one that another car had already been fighting for 6 years. At number one, we have the 1964 Pontiac GTO. This is not going to be the argument you expect. The GTO does not win this ranking because it was the fastest car on this list. It wasn't, not even close, and by 1970, it would have been humiliated by half the cars already ranked above it. It wins because none of those cars would have looked the way they did or existed in the numbers they did without what happened inside Pontiac's engineering department in late 1963. General Motors had a corporate rule restricting how much engine could go into an intermediate car. Pontiac's engineers, John DeLorean chief among them, working alongside colleagues who rarely get mentioned outside enthusiast circles, found the loophole. The GTO wasn't sold as its own model. It was a $296 option package bolted onto the mid-size Le Mans, dropping in a 389 cubic inch V8 rated at 325 horsepower standard, or 348 horsepower with the tri-power triple carburetor setup. Pontiac's own sales division was so nervous about the idea that it only approved 5,000 units to be built. Dealers blew through that number almost instantly. By the time the model year ended, Pontiac had sold 32,450 of them. Don't misunderstand what that success actually means. It doesn't mean the GTO invented raw American horsepower that already existed. What it means is that the GTO proved, for the first time, that a young buyer would pay real money for a fast, affordable, mid-size performance car sold with attitude instead of luxury. Every single car ranked above it on this list, the Chevelle, the Road Runner, the GSX, the 442, the Super B, the Rebel Machine, the Torino Cobra, the Charger, even the GTX, exists in the specific shape it does because Pontiac's gamble forced every other division and every other brand to respond. The Chevelle represents the ceiling of the horsepower war. The GTO is the reason that war started at all, and that's a different kind of legendary than a spec sheet can measure. So here's where this list actually lands. The greatest muscle car in this ranking isn't necessarily the machine that perfected the horsepower war. It's the machine whose success made that war unavoidable. A car can be faster, rarer, more expensive, or more technologically advanced than the GTO. Several cars on this list are all four, without being more historically consequential. Reasonable people can rank the LS6 Chevelle, the GSX, or the Road Runner above it, depending on what they value most, and there's a real argument for every single one of those positions. Now it's your turn. Which car on this list do you think I ranked too low, and which one still doesn't deserve the praise it gets? Tell me in the comments, because these are the arguments that have kept gas station parking lots loud for 60 years, and I don't expect them to go quiet now. Until the next one, keep the engines running, and keep the arguments louder than the exhaust. This has been Motor Memento.